Imagine a silence. Not the peace of untroubled sleep, but the chilling void that follows a midnight knock. Imagine a world where your neighbor's whisper could be your death sentence, where a forgotten joke could cost you everything. This was the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, and for millions, that knock was the prelude to an unimaginable horror, the Gulag. Today, we delve into one of history's darkest chapters. We're not just recounting statistics, we're attempting to understand what it was like to exist within Stalin's vast empire of forced labor, the Gulag Archipelago. This was not merely a prison system, it was a universe designed for dehumanization, for the extraction of labor, and ultimately, for the eradication of the unwanted. Our story begins not in the bleak camps, but in the ordinary homes of ordinary people. The year could be 1937 or 1948, or any year of Stalin's 3-decade reign. The victim could be a factory worker, a celebrated poet, a decorated war veteran, a peasant, or even a loyal party member. The reasons for arrest were often absurd, fabricated, or non-existent. Anti-Soviet agitation, sabotage, socially dangerous elements, or simply failing to meet an arbitrary quota for arrests assigned to the secret police, the NKVD. The Black Raven, the colloquial term for the NKVD's prison vans, would arrive in the dead of night. There was no warrant, no explanation, just brute force and crushing authority. Families were left in terror, never knowing if they would see their loved one again. The first stop was often an NKVD interrogation cell. Here, the accused faced relentless psychological torment, sleep deprivation, and brutal physical abuse. Confessions, often for crimes never committed, were extracted under duress. The objective wasn't justice, it was to break the individual, to create a narrative that reinforced the state's paranoia. A quick trial, often lasting mere minutes, would follow, or simply an administrative decree. The verdict was almost always the same: guilty. The sentence, years or decades in the Gulag. Then came the journey. Packed into overcrowded, unsanitary Stalin cars, converted cattle wagons, prisoners began their long, torturous odyssey to the camps. Hundreds crammed into spaces designed for dozens, with no room to lie down, no privacy. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, urine, and fear. Food was scarce, often just salted fish and stale bread, water cruelly rationed. The journey could last weeks, sometimes months, across thousands of miles of the vast Soviet landscape. Many died en route from starvation, disease, or simply the brutal conditions. Their bodies were unceremoniously dumped alongside the tracks, forgotten markers of a state's indifference to human life. For those who survived, each day brought them closer to an unknown hell, a place whispered about in hushed tones, a place beyond the reach of law or humanity. Finally, the train would shudder to a halt in some desolate, frozen wasteland. The doors would fling open, revealing a landscape utterly alien and hostile. Barbed wire fences rose against a bleak sky, watchtowers loomed, and the rhythmic crack of whips shattered the silence. This was the Gulag. The first act upon arrival was the stripping away of identity. Names were replaced with numbers or the dismissive term Zek, short for Zakljuchani, the imprisoned. Personal belongings, if any remained, were confiscated. Clothes were replaced with thin, ragged camp uniforms, cotton tunics and trousers, often too thin for the Siberian winters, often taken from the recently deceased. The new arrivals were immediately confronted with the grim reality of camp life. The barracks were crude, unheated wooden shacks, often infested with lice and rats. Bunks, if available, were 3 or 4 tiers high, offering no comfort or privacy. The air inside was perpetually stale, reeking of unwashed bodies and fear. This was the cornerstone of the Gulag system. dehumanization. By stripping prisoners of their names, their possessions, their dignity, and their individuality, the state sought to break their spirit, to render them mere units of labor, easily controlled and easily discarded. Personal identity was a dangerous luxury. Survival depended on shedding it, or desperately clinging to fragments in secret. The primary purpose of the Gulag was labor. From the frozen forests of Kolyma to the Kazakh steppes, prisoners were forced to construct canals, build railways, fell timber, mine gold, coal, and uranium, all for the glory of the Soviet state. The work was brutal, relentless, and designed to extract the maximum output from bodies pushed past their limits. In the freezing taiga, prisoners, often without proper tools or experience, were forced to fell trees with blunt axes and handsaws. The trees were then dragged by hand or with makeshift sleds through waist-deep snow. In the mines, they chipped away at frozen rock in suffocating dust, with constant risk of collapse or explosion. On construction sites, they moved earth and stone with picks and shovels, often for projects that were poorly planned or strategically worthless. The workday was often 12 to 16 hours long, regardless of weather. In winter, temperatures could plummet to minus 50 degrees Celsius. Frostbite was a constant companion, claiming fingers, toes, and noses. Summer brought swarms of mosquitoes, relentless heat, and the spread of disease. Quotas were impossibly high. Failure to meet them meant reduced rations, which in turn led to weaker bodies and further inability to meet quotas, creating a deadly spiral. Violence was commonplace, meted out by guards or by the brigadiers, often criminal prisoners, given power over the political prisoners and entrusted with enforcing quotas. The whip, the club, and the arbitrary punishment were ever-present threats. If forced labor was the body of the Gulag, then hunger, cold, and disease were its lifeblood, quietly and efficiently thinning the ranks. The daily ration was barely enough to sustain a sedentary person, let alone someone performing back-breaking labor in extreme conditions. The typical daily ration consisted of a few hundred grams of coarse black bread, often mixed with sawdust or impurities, and a thin, watery porridge known as kasha, made from oats or millet. Sometimes a meager piece of dried fish or a small amount of soup was added. This was the fuel for a day of unimaginable exertion. Disease ran rampant through the overcrowded, unsanitary camps. Typhus, dysentery, scurvy, tuberculosis, they spread like wildfire. The lack of proper nutrition meant weakened immune systems. Open wounds festered. Medical facilities were rudimentary or non-existent, often staffed by fellow Zeks with minimal supplies. Death was a constant presence, a silent specter waiting for the weakest, the most exhausted. Bodies were often simply piled up, sometimes buried in shallow graves, sometimes left frozen until spring, unmarked and unmourned. Yet, amidst this brutality, sparks of humanity sometimes flickered. Some prisoners found solace in sharing stories, reciting poetry from memory, or secretly conducting intellectual discussions. Acts of quiet solidarity, sharing a hidden crust of bread, offering comfort to a dying comrade, were small, dangerous rebellions against the system's intent to atomize and dehumanize. Survival involved constant calculation. Every decision, every interaction could mean life or death. Learning to barter, to hide, to adapt, to feign illness, to find small ways to ease the labor, these were crucial skills. Some found strength in faith, others in their political convictions, others still in the sheer animalistic will to live. The Gulag tested the very limits of human endurance, revealing both the depths of human cruelty and the incredible capacity for resilience. Beyond the physical torment, the Gulag inflicted profound psychological wounds. The constant fear, the loss of freedom, the systematic degradation, the uncertainty of ever seeing loved ones again, all combined to erode the very essence of self. Many prisoners described a gradual fading of their former selves, memories blurred, emotions dulled, the focus narrowed to the primal instincts of survival, food, warmth, and avoiding the gaze of the guards. Yet even in this bleak uniformity, the human spirit sometimes found a way to resist complete obliteration. The hope of justice, however distant, sustained others. And for many, the simple, defiant hope of seeing another sunrise, of surviving one more day, was battle enough. Stalin's reign of terror officially ended with his death in 1953. Over the subsequent years, many Gulag prisoners were gradually released, but the scars, both physical and psychological, remained. Their lives had been irrevocably altered. They carried the burden of their experiences, often facing continued discrimination and suspicion back home. The exact number of victims of the Gulag system remains debated, but historians estimate that at least 18 million people passed through its gates between 1929 and 1953. Of those, between 1.5 and 1.7 million perished from exhaustion, starvation, disease, or execution within the camps. Others lost their lives during transit or immediately after release, making the true toll even higher. These aren't just numbers. Each one represents a human life, a family shattered, a potential extinguished. The Gulag was a stark demonstration of what happens when absolute power marries ideology, when human life is deemed expendable for the sake of a perceived greater good. Remembering the Gulag is not about dwelling in the past for its own sake. It is about understanding the warning it serves. It is about recognizing the insidious ways that authoritarianism takes root, how propaganda can distort reality, and how easily human rights can be eroded. It is our duty to listen to the whispers from those frozen earth graves, to hear the stories of survival against impossible odds, and to ensure that such a shadow never falls over humanity again. Thank you for joining me on this journey into a crucial, yet often overlooked part of history. If you found this video insightful, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to help us bring more stories like this to light. Your engagement helps us keep these memories alive.